All right. So, yeah, tell me how you're feeling. What would you like to focus on for today?
Okay, so
Having said that, we will use some processes that help you get to the root of all your negative emotions, feelings, and problems. But I don't want you to feel restricted by any of these processes. So if you want to say something outside of it any time, feel free to do so.
okay. So what we talked about was childhood trauma, correct?
How and then how it replays into your present day life. But we don't need to like go into the trauma immediately. Like to know
Okay.
what you're feeling, how are you feeling, and then what you like to focus on for today.
I mean, how I'm feeling today is great. I feel really good. I already went to the gym. I'm doing really well. My moments of struggle come sporadically. It's not like all the time. So like there's most of my life I choose to be happy, but you know, we all have our emotional states where I get in a loop. And so since I was younger, I would actually smoke those loops away. In full transparency, I used cannabis. I saw my dad used cannabis a lot. So I saw it as a mechanism for relaxation. And so I just kind of utilized that instead of learning my own emotions and how to handle them. I just learned how to eradicate them very quickly. And I'm at a point in time in my life where that's not serving me anymore. It's numbing me away from it instead of helping me work through it. And so I'm really trying to work away from that. But my struggles just come with, essentially it just comes from my childhood of lack of love and from women specifically. And then the way that I saw love exhibited was in a sexual manner. So my mindset when I see women is typically in a sexual manner. And it's very frustrating for myself because I don't want to do that anymore. You know, I don't want to feel like that. And I've had so many people say, oh, it's just the guy thing. It's okay. And I've studied enough of the mind to know that while that may be somewhat true, a lot of it stems from what I've experienced. And I can't necessarily erase those experiences. And I've done the best that I can to understand them. So at this point, I feel like I need outside help in order to get into the roots of it.
Can you tell me more about when you get into those loops? What are you feeling and what situation is bringing up those feelings and emotions in you?
It's to feel good. I want to feel good. That's ultimately.
You said sometimes, you know, you for most part you're feeling happy, but then there's these loops where you feel down. Can you tell me more about those times?
Okay, so a direct example would be yesterday. I was doing really well all day yesterday, and then I was in a conversation with a woman, and the way the conversation went kind of made me upset because the way that she perceived me wasn't the way that I was trying to be perceived. And so it frustrated me because I've really worked hard on how I speak to people so that I can, you know, not put my own imposements on it. And so the way she took it was like I was doing that. So it was kind of frustrating. And then at the same time, I am, you know, aiming not to smoke. And so I went through the whole day of not smoking, and then this situation happened, and then I got frustrated, and then I was trying to release it, but the frustration just stayed. So I tried different things. I tried taking a bath.
So
I tried
trying
listening
to have a portray like a positive portrayal of yourself, but then she had a negative perception of you. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
What did you do to make her feel that way?
Well, she too is a coach. And so I was, in a sense, prospecting her, and I was just asking her questions. I was genuinely curious with the questions that I was asking, but because we have had a relationship in the past, she felt like it was fake and like it was rehearsed. And then she just got upset, and she just didn't want to hear what I had to say anymore. And I told her, I was like, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but I'm genuinely, you know, curious and trying to learn more about you. And she's like, well, it just seems rehearsed and faked, and I don't want to hear it. And I was like, okay. So then I kind of was like, well, what did I do wrong? And I started to dissect it. I actually had the conversation with my wife. I had her read what was said, and she kind of explained to me. And ultimately what we came to the conclusion is that it was a personal issue that she had, not necessarily something that I did, but my frustration just stayed. It just didn't go anywhere.
Got it. This is really interesting, but I want to first connect with you emotionally. Tell me, what emotion do you experience out of anxiety, worry, fear, anger, or frustration?
At this point in my life, it's more frustration.
Okay. And what problem or situation brings up strong feelings of frustration or anger in you?
Having a desired outcome and it's not achieved. So because I've done a lot of personal growth to be in the position that I'm in, and I really want to be honed and refined into my skills. And so sometimes I get frustrated that I'm not where I want to be. And so that begins the frustration. And then I just kind of go from there.
Can you give me an example of a desired outcome that you feel like you have not achieved?
Okay, well, if we'll continue the example from last night, the desired outcome was to just have a good conversation with her. And it turned into her getting frustrated with me, like I was prospecting her and like I was doing something negative. And to me, I wasn't doing anything negative. So it was like I thought I was doing everything that I've been taught to do, and it's still turning into something negative. So it's like, what did I do wrong? What could I have been better? I read a book by Gary Chapman a few years ago. It's called Understanding Anger. And so I just try to dissect why I feel the way that I feel and try to work through it. But sometimes it's easier said than done.
Let's go with this example, and then I'm pretty sure some other examples. Actually, can you tell me another example of a problem or situation that brings up strong feelings of frustration or anger in you? Like a desired outcome not being achieved or something else?
I don't know if using children is a good example, because children can be frustrating at times. What do you think? Is that a good example or no? Because that's the first thing that popped up into my head.
Go ahead. Is it your children?
Yeah. We've been babysitting our nephew, and it's difficult when there's different rules in different households. So when he comes here, I kind of get frustrated because the way that he acts isn't necessarily how I would want him to act, but I got to honor his mother's request. But my kids can be difficult at times too. So trust is very important. Trust is very important. It's something that I've explained, that my wife and I have thoroughly explained to our children, that you need to keep trust with people. And but sometimes they want to do what they want to do. And I understand that. And one of the things that I learned is that kids need to understand why. So I'll be apt to explain everything and break it down. And so my wife we got the kids a Nintendo Switch, and they love playing the Switch, but we're very cautious on how often. So we give them 2 hours twice a week. And so with that, that's not enough to them. They want more. And so we've explained to them why, the screen's not good for you. We want you to have an imagination, all those different reasons. And then my wife told them not to take it outside. It's not allowed to leave the house under their supervision. And when we were down here in meetings, they were actually taking it outside and playing with it and hiding it from us. And I actually caught her trying to put it back. And so it was very frustrating to me, because we've had these conversations about trust and lying and not breaking trust, and also why the system, and they're more interested in what they want to do than they are about doing what's right. And one thing that my wife and I are really trying to teach them is to do what's right even when it's hard, to be a good person.
Is this with your nephew and also your own kids as well?
Well, the situation of the Nintendo Switch is solely on my children, not because my nephew is only 2 years old. So he's really little. He wouldn't necessarily be playing with it. But my son's 5 and my daughter's 9.
Got it. This is all interesting. Can you give me another, just one last example of a problem or situation bring up strong feelings of frustration or anger?
When someone asks, I have a friend who asked for advice, and he's 22 now, and he asked me for advice, and then I'll give him advice. Like, he specifically asked me to tell him the advice, so I will. And then it's like the next day, it's the same story, different dance. and we just keep going down the same path. And at some point it begins to get frustrating. It's like, well, why do I continue to repeat myself if you're just not going to listen? Now, that's not necessarily the same level of frustration as the other two examples, because I'm not like extremely frustrated or nothing, but it is somewhat frustrating. Like, why are we talking about you can't say that you want change and yet do nothing about it. Like that doesn't work. You have to want it and then apply it, and he's not applying it.
Got it. So one process that we will use is the not all of it, but it's called the emotional strength FIST process. F stands for feeling, as in feeling is healing. Normally we don't like to feel. What we do instead is that we think, and overthink to avoid our feelings. And there's a mantra that will help you center yourself. And it goes, problems bring up feelings in us that existed before the problem ever happened. And so the thinking mind or the racing mind will tell you it is a certain problem causing you a negative emotion, negative feeling. So if you fix the problem, you'll fix the feeling. But the reality is the feeling preceded the problem. So even if you fix the problem, the feeling will still exist. Okay. And so so first you want to have a different relationship with your feelings. So we don't like to feel. So it helps you to know that feeling is healing because it connects you to love. So even if you feel the negative emotion, negative feeling, it already begins the healing process. Okay. And it is also helpful to know these feelings and emotions are actually part of your emotional guidance system. It is actually telling you, it's guiding you back to your authenticity, but we'll talk more about that later. Now, I is to identify these feelings, and we will use a process called the PEWF, POOF process. We already did the first half. So P is problem, E is emotion. So I asked, what problem brings up this emotion in you? Now W, the next part is W, and it's worst fear, worst case scenario. You want to stretch the original problem into your worst fear, worst case scenario, and tell me, what does it look like? So the first situation where the person that you're prospecting had a negative perception of you, were thinking like, what did I do wrong? Now stretch that to your worst fear, worst case scenario. What does that look like?
I did something wrong. I'm wrong. I grew up where I could almost never be right. I had a perfectionist father. And so no matter how hard I tried to do things right, it would never be to his standards. And so it was very defeating, and it created this lack of confidence in myself. If I can't do it right, then why bother trying? And so, but I don't want to live like that. I want to try. That's how you get better. So I continue to try. But then when I make a mistake, all those emotions from my childhood flood back in.
Got it. You're really on point. You already got to the...
I don't know where that came from, if I'm going to be straight up with you. You just asked, and I just answered. So I got goosebumps just saying that out loud. That's crazy.
And so to identify these feelings, you want to imagine if your worst fear came true, worst fear, worst case scenario came true, how would that make you feel about who you are? So that's the F in the POOF process, feeling about the self. So now there's three common feelings that come up, and I call them FWP. F stands for failure or failing others. W is an umbrella feeling with many subcategories, and it's worthlessness. By the way, these feelings are going to say something really negative about you, but they're not true about who you really are. We want to pull out the weeds, cut the head off the snake. Now, so the subcategories for worthlessness are: I don't matter, I don't exist, I'm alone, I'm abandoned, even the fear of death, because if you die, you cease to exist. Now, P is powerless. Powerless as a protector, as the peacemaker, because you feel immensely responsible for others, or powerless just because you need to be in control. Now, if your worst fear, worst case scenario came true in this situation, what did I do wrong? I am wrong. How would that make you feel, the FWP, and why? Failure.
Can you remind me of what F is?
Failure or failing others.
So to be transparent, I actually resonate with all three of them, but I think it's dependent on the situation. But ultimately, I think the one that's the loudest to me is the failure. I used to have this desire for control, but have realized that we don't have control. And so I kind of released that desire. And abandonment stems from when I was 2, my mom was in a very bad car accident. And since she was in a car accident, she was actually put in a coma for like a month or 2. So I actually didn't see her. And so in that state of mind at 2 years old, I felt abandoned. And so I've kind of worked through those a little bit. But I'm not saying that those are 100% eradicated. So that's why I'm saying I resonate with all 3. I just wanted to give context on why.
And let's give me an example, like when your dad was perfectionist and if you did something that wasn't quote unquote right in his eyes, how would he respond?
He would yell. He would belittle. You can't do it. Like what? I guess if you got to do something right, you got to do it yourself. That's what that was his catchphrase. And the situation that I can think of off the top of my head is pulling the weeds out of the garden. Something so petty and small, but I missed a couple weeds. And so it turned into this big ordeal about how I missed the weeds. Or it was like last year, I was driving in Vegas. He was too inebriated to drive. He asked me to drive because he lives in Vegas. I drove there. And I went wrong way on a one-way because it was very confusing. And immediately when we found out, I turned around and I started going the correct way, but he just couldn't let it go. And for like 20 to 30 minutes, he just kept complaining about it and being upset about it. And I finally just told him, like, you're making yourself miserable for no reason. And it turned into this long ordeal where we're kind of yelling at each other because I'm trying to help him and he just doesn't want to hear it. And he's just all focused on how wrong I am and the things I do wrong. And anytime something comes up that it's in the wrong, like he'll bring up the past real quick on the things that I've done in the past. I'm like, I'm not even there anymore. Like, no, he doesn't do it so much anymore, but there are times still. Cause like, for example, when I was 15, I was in a high-speed chase with his truck. I flipped his truck. He got very upset because I took his truck and why am I always taking his things is what he would say. Oh, you're a man. I mean, that's typically what's going to happen. A boy's going to look after a man. Now, I'm not saying that decision was right. Definitely shouldn't have done that, but he spent years bringing that up all the time. And I was 15 when that happened. Now, all the way up until I was like 24, 25, he still talks about it.
Well, can you clarify? So you were in a high-speed chase, you took his car?
Long story short, I got in an argument with my girlfriend. I decided to go over and hang out with some friends. I had never driven a car before on the street, but the keys were there. So I hopped in the truck, drove down the street. As I was leaving my friend's house, the cop saw me. I got in the car and then the cop pulled up behind me and I was terrified. So I just pulled off and just sped away and they all followed me. I ended up flipping the truck, having like 7 cop cars behind me. I ran away on foot. I ran away on foot. I actually ended up going home. I went to sleep. I woke up 2 hours later and was freaking out because I didn't know how to handle the situation. And then my parents called the cops, of course. And then they said that they had the picture of the driver. And me being 15 and ignorant, I believed them. And so I'm like freaking out. As soon as the cops leave, I tell my parents and I got put on probation. I got in a whole bunch of trouble for that.
Okay. All right. Now, with the situation with your kids breaking the rules and you want them to do what's right and to be a good person, so they break your trust by not to break these rules that they agreed to. Now, stretch this to your worst fear, worst case scenario. What does that look like?
They turned into something like who I was. I don't want them to be like who I was.
What do you mean by who you were?
I was very selfish, self-centered. I cared about people, but I cared about myself more than anything else. And so I would do things that only mattered to me. And I didn't care about how it influenced others if they weren't around. Now, if we were straight to your face, I would love you to death. I would be the best person you could be. But as soon as you turned around, I would do whatever I wanted to do, regardless of who it impacted in a negative way.
Can you give me an example of that?
I was always good. I did my chores. I was a modern day Cinderella. I cooked, I cleaned, everything. And then as soon as my parents would go to sleep, I would sneak out of the house and I would go hang out with friends, or at that age, I was smoking weed, but I didn't have a resource of income. So I would steal from people. I would car hop. I didn't rob houses or anything. I just walk around the neighborhood, and if a car was unlocked, I'd go through it. And if I found something, great. If I didn't, I didn't. And I just kind of moved forward. And, but I took that as far as you possibly could. Like, it got to a point where my parents actually bought a security system to put on the house, not to keep people out, but to keep me in. And I still found ways around it. I took the motion sensor, because you know how like they got the motion sensor. Well, I actually took the film out of it and flipped it upside down. So all of the rays that came from it actually pointed to the ceiling instead of to the floor. So I would just crawl around on the floor so I could still go around the house and do what I wanted to do. So I just didn't care about other people more than I cared about myself. Now, at the age, it was because no one cared about me, in my opinion. So I should care about me more than anything else. But I don't feel like that is the same circumstances for my kids. So it's fearful for me for them to make the same poor decisions that I did. So I don't want them to have to, go down the same path I did and learn through going to jail and all those other different things. So that would be my worst fear.
What do you think it was the motivating factor to do that? Because I don't think it's coming from a bad place. It was just like,
no, I don't.
It was like an unmet need, but you're trying to meet it indirectly. But I was wondering, like, what was the motivating factor to do those things?
To feel good. Like I was saying earlier, you asked, I don't remember what you asked. It was about substance. I used substance to feel good. I didn't feel good at home. I didn't feel good with my friends. You know, I'm a physical touch individual. That's like my number one love language. And I grew up in a family that doesn't hug, that doesn't kiss, that doesn't cuddle. My friends didn't hug or none of that. So I just grew up very isolated from feeling what I would consider feel good emotions. And so substances like weed would make me feel better, and it would numb away the resentment and frustration and bring about happiness and joy. And so when I would take money from people or even hang out with other people, then typically the people that I hung out with also smoked. So I would just go around them and hang out with them and smoke. And I started smoking cigarettes, and because there was a cigarette buzz and it felt good. And my parents said that, it's what relaxed them. And so it was always about the internal feeling of good.
To avoid what?
The lack thereof.
But then the feeling of resentment, right?
Right. But I think the feeling of resentment came at a later age because I was frustrated that I was thrown on Ritalin in first grade, and I was trying to recollect myself mentally, but I was really struggling, and I was using that as a crutch to say, oh, well, I am this way because this happened to me. And a lot of my resentment was like frustrated with my mom for allowing them to put drugs down my throat, the teachers for enforcing it, the doctors, and it was like, I messed up. My head is tore up and messed up, and it's all someone else's fault. And I need them to apologize to me to make me feel better. And when I tried that route with my mom, it didn't work. I didn't feel better. And I realized that, that resentment didn't go anywhere. But I grew that resentment as I grew.
Who labeled you with ADHD?
The doctors.
But before the doctors did that, who?
Sorry, I'm gonna go get my charger. I don't want to die. Okay. Continue that.
Okay. Yeah. So, did your parents had the thought that you had ADHD before the doctors did?
Honestly, I don't know the answer to that question. I think that what happened is that I like to talk, and I like to move. That's just kind of what I do even to this day. So they didn't like that, They want you to sit down and follow instructions.
Your parents didn't like that?
No, the teachers. My mom didn't care. But that's why my mom took me off of the medication, was because she said I was starting to act like a drone. And she didn't like that.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't your parents saying like, oh, you're too hyper. You don't listen.
No, sir.
Okay. When you said like you don't want your kids to be selfish like you, what was the emotion and the pain behind that about?
Because I know that struggle is inevitable. Struggle is part of the process. We learn through our struggle, but I don't want to see my kids struggle in the same way I did. If I can see them struggle, I'm not going to say they're not going to struggle or that I don't want them to struggle, because I feel like that's very important for us to grow. But I just wouldn't want them to have to go through what I went through, because it was rough. It was very rough. And to be in a position of being alone, and you're the only one you have in your corner, which is what it's like when you're in jail, because you're alone, and there's you have inmates and stuff, but they're also in the same predicament. And you don't walk around hugging people when you're in jail. I'll tell you that much. That's not viewed the best way. So there's just it's just the adversity that comes behind it, behind being selfish.
Oh, when you're selfish, then you become you experience loneliness.
Because you're only worried about yourself. That's how it was for me, at least. So that's why I'm saying that's why I have that fear with my children, is because I don't want them to worry about just themselves and then, stumble and fall along the way if they don't have to.
Got it. I'd like to clarify what you mean when you said about your kids. You said you want them to do what's right and to be a good person. What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm very spiritual, and I've done a lot of research in spirituality, and I've learned that the essence of life is to love, and to love is to serve, and serving is being a good person, in my opinion. Doing the right thing is I hate using the term common sense, because common sense is so different depending on who you're talking to and what their experiences of life have been. But as far as smiling at people, being polite to people, things that just being respectful in general, I feel like that would be classified as doing the right thing. Like if you find a wallet on the ground, you're not going to pick it up and take all the money and then turn it in. You're going to turn it in as it is. Things of that nature. Just treating others the way you would like to be treated to a certain extent. But I like I prefer the one of don't do unto others as you wouldn't want them to do to you, because sometimes people want to be treated differently. So if you treat someone the way you want to be treated, it doesn't always work. But if, I don't want to be stolen from, so I won't steal from somebody else. You know what I mean?
Got it. When your friend doesn't listen to your advice, how does that make you feel about yourself? Remember think about the FWP: failure, worthless, or powerless.
Ooh, that's a good one. I think it stems down to the last one, control.
How so?
Because I don't feel like I'm a failure. I feel like in the position that I'm in now, I'd rather be under the term of a guru, I don't need to prove it to anyone. I know what I know, and I've experienced to know it. So as far as failure goes, I wouldn't see that. Worthlessness, I wouldn't say I feel worthless either.
About the powerless and control, how does that play into the picture? Is it because you really want to help the person and you feel powerless to do so since they're not listening?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Because you almost feel responsible for them?
Only because he views me like that, and I view him like that. I consider him a brother. I consider him a younger version of myself. A lot of the struggles that he's went through, I went through, and we resonate a lot on those. So that's why he asked me for advice. And so when I give it to him and it's not received, it's frustrating. Yeah.
Got it. All right, we did a good job of identifying all the feelings and emotions. I want to go to the next phase, which is S, which is separation. This is all from the second book I wrote, but then in this next book I'm writing, it's become more evolved. But separating is separating from what doesn't belong to you. and it's about understanding your parents emotionally. But before we go there, do you have any questions, thoughts, or feelings?
No, sir.
Okay.
I thank you, though. You're doing a great job.
Right, thank you. So I'd like to understand your parents emotionally. Tell me, which parent is more emotionally expressive?
That's a tough one. So emotions are all over the place. We're not just talking about like negative emotions, we're talking about all emotions.
Yeah, it can be all. But emotionally suppressive on the opposite spectrum is somebody who more bottles in their emotions.
So I would say my stepdad is emotionally expressive and my mom is the one that bottles it all up.
How about the perfectionist father? Is that your stepdad or your biological father?
Yeah. So my biological father has never been in my life. So if I ever say dad, I'm speaking to my stepfather.
Got it. Okay. So with you already kind of told me, sharing about your stepfather, but tell me, what emotion does he experience out of anxiety, worry, fear, anger, or frustration?
I would say anger and frustration.
And what problem or situation brings up strong feelings of anger or frustration in him?
Control. He is a very controlling individual and sprinkling a little narcissism too.
Okay. And so tell me, can you give me an example? Can you give me an example?
Okay. So that same night that we went around in the when I went the wrong way and the one way, he was frustrated, and I told him, I was like, "You're like that situation's over. Like you can sit there and relax. You're getting a drive home. Like if it was really that big of a deal, you could have drove yourself, but you asked me to drive. So your frustration is just pointless." And he's like, "Why would you do?" I was like, "Bro, it's not that big of a deal. Like you're making it into such more of a big deal than it needs to be." And then the thing kind of continued on, and then I just wasn't having it. I was trying to explain to him how he was acting was childish, and then he ended up saying something along the lines, because this was like a 3-hour argument, so I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty, but he ended up saying, "I'm never wrong." And I was like, whatever, because earlier that day we were watching this thing on it was the C-SPAN thing, and he has a little bit of racism in him, and so he was like, I bet he said she's a Democrat. It was a black lady who was a Democrat, and he said she was going to say something, and she said absolutely nothing of what he said she was going to say. And so when he said, "I'm never wrong, name a time I was wrong," I used that as an example, and he's like, "Oh, that doesn't count." I'm like, "How does that not count?" So I actually went through 2 more examples that I can't remember off the top of my head, but each one of the
let's sprinkle a little narcissism. What are examples of his narcissistic behavior?
He knows the right way. He knows the right way. Every time he's on a job working with someone, he's the leader. Everyone needs to listen to him. You know, no arguments. He's not trying to hear from nobody else. If he wants something done right, he's got to do it himself. And he's the only one that knows how to do it right.
Got it. All right. With your mother, what emotion does she experience out of anxiety, worry, fear, anger, or frustration?
Anxiety, worry, and fear.
And what problem or situation brings up strong feelings of anxiety, worry, or fear in her?
Her health.
Can you give me an example?
Well, since she was in that extreme car accident, she gave someone else control over the car, and they squandered that. So she has a ton of fear of releasing control to someone else or letting anyone else have an influence over her life in a drastic way, because when that happened last time, it didn't work out well. And then due to the car accident, she had like minor, I wouldn't say minor, she had personal issues, like her thyroid swelled up to the size of a softball instead of a golf ball. So she had to get that removed. And then when she got that removed, her thyroid were actually supporting her jaw. So her jaw kind of dropped a little bit, and it created a bunch of TMJ issues. And So since she's been hurt, and then afterwards she just continuously got hurt, I think in her mind, she's going to continuously get sick. So at this point, she lives in Vegas, and she has a really large house that she never leaves. The only time she leaves is to get coffee or go to the doctor's office. Other than that, she gets all her things shipped to her house through Amazon. And she's blessed that she can actually operate her job from home as well.
What is your worst case scenario?
She'll get sick. We flew in from here to go visit her like 3 months ago, and somehow we got sick. We got some stomach virus thing. I don't know if it was on the way there or what. And that's like the worst thing that could possibly happen to us going to my mom's house, because then the day that we were leaving, she was talking about how her stomach hurt, and now she's worried that she was going to get sick. And I was like, "You're going to be fine. You'll be all right." And then later, she ended up saying, and I don't know how much to believe because there's two sides of the story, but later she ended up saying that she wished that we wouldn't have came. She says that she wished that we would have waited, and that, then that wouldn't have happened. But ultimately, you never know when you're going to get sick. And I personally am not going to live my life in fear of when am I going to get sick and then not go live. And so that was kind of what happened for her in that situation.
And if her worst case is that she gets sick, how would that make her feel about who she is? How would that make her feel, the FWP, and why? Failure, worthless, or powerless?
Powerless.
Powerless because?
She doesn't have control over her health. And she feels like the outside influence is what has control over her health, not herself.
So the main issue is that she feels powerless. But if she really is sick, how does that make her feel? Like the event had already happened and now she is sick. What does she fear would happen because of that?
I honestly, I don't know. Probably worst case scenario, because out of her experiences, that's generally what's happened to her, is she's been the worst case scenario. So like when she gets new medications, she's always looking at the side effects, because she's like, I typically have the worst case scenario. And, I've realized that the more you believe something, the more it becomes true. And she believes these things to be worst case scenarios. So it typically turns into the worst case scenario.
Okay. We'll come back to that one, but let's start putting everything together. So when you said what then that person that you're prospecting, what if they have a negative perception of you? Like, what did I do wrong? And I am wrong, and that makes you feel that because you had a perfectionist father, nothing you did was right. Mm-hmm. So you can see these feelings that you feel, that instead of like, okay, I'll smoke weed to avoid the feelings that you feel because the situation is bringing up in you, they just want your validation. It is your inner child. Pain is your inner child yearning for your love. So instead of, like, let's say this pen, right? Do you have a pen around you?
Does it need to write?
No. It doesn't need to write.
Okay. Yeah, I got a stylus.
So imagine that in this pen is all your negative emotions and feelings. Okay. What we normally want to do, we want to suppress it, avoid it, fix it, even heal it. We want to change the feeling. So we want to eventually just kind of push the pen away, push these feelings and emotions away, so we no longer feel this way. But that's what is invalidating us. These feelings come from a very valid place. It is very valid for you to feel that way. It's not true about who you really are. Validation is not about accepting something that is true about who you are. It is acknowledging the trauma that it is rooted in. The way your stepfather, which is the only father you knew, basically projects his feelings of incompetence in a very abusive way. It seems normal to you because this is what you grew up around, but it's not, and he is treating you as an extension of himself. And thereby he's making you responsible for how he feels. He's lashing out at you as if you're the cause of his past traumas that were there before you were ever born. And one thing, I haven't posted it, but then one sign I want to create is treating your children as an extension of yourself is emotionally raping them, because it annihilates their emotional existence. You only exist as his appendage. I mean, it's unfortunate, I don't want to demonize them, because we're all victims of victims. Okay, but you got to call out this trauma of being treated as an extension. Because it means you don't have your own existence. You're not allowed to have your own existence. You must exist to serve his pain and his ego. So when you said before, you said to love is to serve. Yes, we have a purpose, and it's important to serve others through this purpose. But then what I want you to be conscious of that is that servitude becomes really strong, because remember, as his extension, and your mother does this too, she's all lost in this pain of like, oh, if I'm sick, I'll feel powerless. And then, oh, I wish you hadn't come. She makes you in her movie. She puts you in her movie and doesn't see you as a separate entity. So there's something else I want to say, but any thoughts, feelings, or questions?
No, I'm very grateful for this, because it's your perspective is definitely opening my eyes to helping me understand, because I don't have anger or resentment towards them, because I too understand we are all victims of victims, and we all have our own struggles to work through. But understanding where it comes from for them helps me understand a little bit more of myself. And ultimately, I just want to know more of me, because then I can be better.
Got it. So yeah, when these feelings come up, you want to, like the pen, you want to bring it closer to you. You want to be with the feeling. Being with the feeling is being with yourself. If we push the feeling away, if you use cannabis to push the feeling away, suppress it or numb it, you are invalidating the feeling, the same way that you were invalidated as a child. Because you're invalidated when you're treated as an extension. You don't have your own existence. And so this to love is to serve. Also with your friend who doesn't listen, you feel powerless because you want to help him, but you can't in that situation where you feel limited. So be conscious of that this servitude is not branching off of feeling you are an extension of others. Like you're an extension of your friend. It may be subconscious. Because like I micromanage my wife's diet. She loves eating sweets. She gets a lot of cavities because of it. And I want to like micromanage her diet. I want to control her because of things I could not fix in my mother. My mother made me responsible for how she felt. She made me console her through her panic attacks. When I was just 10 years old, she'd wake me up and I would pat her on her back while she's hyperventilating, screaming, yelling, crying, and then would tell me like, there's nobody in the world who can comfort me like you do.
Oh, wow.
So I was her emotional support system.
Would you say that how I'm treating my friend is basically how my dad treated me? Like he is an extension of me and I'm invalidating his experience?
No. What your father conditioned you to feel responsible for him. He would berate you like 3 hours or whatever, 30, he can't let it go. He's making you responsible for his past traumas as if you were the cause. That's the ultimate responsibility. It's like, I can't think of it like, I can't think of it. It's almost like if he was molested or raped as a child and then he thinks you are the rapist. Is it like he just does it subconsciously and it makes him feel better because he's not taking it out on the true source. He's taking it out, but he has to take it on a true source, and we don't want to. A lot of times We don't want to call out our parents because they are our source of love subconsciously as a child. And if we call them out, then we sever our source of love.
Mm. That's deep.
And the one thing interesting you said, if your kids break the rules, you don't want them to be selfish like you were selfish. And if you're selfish, you're alone. I mean, you're the farthest thing from being selfish. And so it was really interesting because you had to serve as their appendage. And if you ever served your own needs, asked for your own needs, you would be abandoned, not because you're in a jail cell, but because you were emotionally abandoned. Because like if you're emotionally abandoned by your father, because like if you don't do things right, he would emotionally abandon you by lashing out on you. So if you do something for yourself, you can't do something for yourself because it's selfish. Self-care is selfish. And if you must serve as an appendage, and if you don't serve as his appendage, then there's emotionally disowning you and you're going to feel alone. This is I feel like that's the main reason why people feel alone. Not because they're physically alone or they don't have a partner, they don't have a family, they don't have friends, but really because of the emotional abandonment that happens when kids don't listen to their parents, don't follow the rules, don't serve their pain and their ego, and then they withdraw their love and acceptance.
That totally makes sense. And as a child, that's like worst case scenario. It's interesting too, this is a little detail that I could throw in there is my dad, he would always say, if you want something, just ask for it. And anytime I would ask for it, he would then critique it on why I didn't need it and tell me that it wasn't valid because he didn't think I needed it. So then that created more of a desire to go steal, because if I'm not going to get it from, them, and they're not going to help me get what I desire, then, I'll go validate myself in if we're going to continue that terminology.
So that's perfect. Like that shows what you were doing is you just need to meet your own needs, but you could not meet them directly because they would not give the things that you wanted from them. So you would have to meet that same need indirectly. So it may from the outside, or maybe, you're looking back at the behavior like, oh, that was a bad person. No, you were just needing to meet a need indirectly because you couldn't meet it directly.
That makes so much sense. Thank you. I really appreciate this. This is great.
Yeah. Thank you. One thing I want to explore with you is that when you're talking about this trust thing with your kids, you want them to do what's right, to be a good person. What about, like, they don't need to be a good person. Neither do you, because you are a good person. You're born that way. It's like, I mean, I've had clients who are like, this is an example, I'm just not bashing anything, but that are Christian, and my dad and my parents are Christian, and then I remember I had this heated conversation, and all of a sudden he just said, we are born sinners. And I said, like, we're not born sinners, we're born perfect. And this speaks to a larger, it's about society as a whole, that you're born imperfect. And then you need to be a good person. Why? How? You follow the rules. But then that means who you are is imperfect. Who you are is not good enough. And you have to follow the rules to be good enough, which means you will never be good enough. Your worth is conditional.
Yes. That's so deep.
Did you experience that how did you experience that in your childhood? These rules of conditional love, these rules of conditional worth.
Well, are you familiar with the 5 love languages?
Yeah.
Okay, so My love languages, there's physical touch, words of affirmation, and quality time. And none of those were met. In order for me to have one of them, which was quality time, is I would have to go around my parents and do what they wanted to do. It was never about what I wanted to do. It was always about what they wanted to do. So my dad always wanted to work or hang out with his friends and drink beer. And so I would find myself, especially because I was in trouble and I wasn't allowed to leave the house, I'd find myself sitting with them in the garage and just hanging out with them and watching them drink and tell their stories and stuff. And then for my mom, the only thing she wanted to do was sit on the couch and watch TV. And me personally, I do not like that. It's like, in order for me to sit down and watch TV, I have to smoke because I like to move. And so she would just sit there and watch TV. So my versions of spending time with my mom was me watching Judge Judy with her or something. And I don't like that woman. She's very mean. But so it was just, I didn't really get validated in what I wanted. And in order to have that quality time with them, I had to seek it out myself.
Just curious, how did they display like who you are? Like, you're not born perfect. You're not born a good person. You have to do these things to be a good person. Did they ever do that? Or how do they teach that? Like, how do they teach that to you? You have to be a good person. You have to do what's right.
My dad just had the phrase, treat others the way you'd like to be treated. That's all he would always say, treat others the way you'd like to be treated. And they didn't really teach me how to be a good person. They would just tell me what I did was wrong. So they didn't focus on the positivity.
Oh, they always tell you what you did was wrong, right?
Yeah. So they focus on negativity rather than positivity. That I remember, at least. You know, that's what's most prominent in my memory.
And so that's why you want your kids to do what's right, because is that why? Because you're conditioned to feel like whatever you did was wrong?
I guess in a sense, yeah, but I also view some of the things that I did was wrong in the way that it was done. Now, I totally understand what you're saying now with the validation and stuff, and I need to validate myself, but the way that I was validating myself was wrong. And so I take my own personal experience and say, well, that isn't being, in my understanding, being a good person. And so I don't want to do those things or be... You
mean the stealing, right?
Yeah, stealing or lying to someone. Those were the two things I did the most. And at this point, I can't even bring myself to do either one of them. Thank God.
But, you know, I want you to even take that phrase or vocabulary out of your being, out of your mind, because like,
what phrase?
I'm not a good person because I did these things.
Oh,
because you weren't,
okay.
You're in survival mode. Your parents are not giving you what any child essentially needs. So you're just gonna have to meet it indirectly to the best way that you can. So there's nothing wrong.
Right. Okay.
They always made you feel wrong. You know, that's one issue when you're treated as an extension of your parents. That means your whole existence, who you truly are, is completely wrong. It's like your shameful existence. That's how like a lot of my clients feel that way, and I can feel that way. It's just, if you're not allowed to have your own existence, that means your existence, your true existence, is wrong. You only exist to serve as somebody else's appendage.
Yeah, every section of my childhood screams that I wasn't right enough. I needed to be on drugs. I needed to be on pills. I needed to, do this or do that. It was constantly trying to shape me into the person they wanted me to be instead of allowing me to be who I wanted to be. So I totally understand what you're saying.
Wait, clarify that again. How would they shape and mold you to the person that they wanted you to be?
Well, you got to do things this way. You got to do it that way. You can't do it this way. You can't do it that way. It needs to be done this way. This is the right way. If you want to do something right, this is the way. And so it was like, nothing I could do was ever the right way unless I did it the way they wanted me to do it. And so then it turns into, like you said, now I'm an extension of them. I'm not even who I want to be. I'm who they want me to be.
Yeah. So I would be very conscious of how, because it's going, that tape player is going to be replaying itself in your mind and how you relate to your kids. And you say you want to do what's right. But remember, in your experience in your childhood, in your relationship to your parents, to do what's right is in quotation marks. It's really to serve their ego, to serve their pain, to serve them as an extension of themselves. That was what was right, because you are wrong. Your existence is wrong. That was the message.
Mm-hmm. So how do I reframe that for myself so that I don't impose those same beliefs on my children?
But then your children are going to naturally bring up that feeling and that thought pattern in you. It's going to intensify it. So it's a good thing. Like you can feel it and you can be conscious of it. But yeah, before we kind of change the feeling, you want to simply be with the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It's because it's so important. It's your inner child. The pain is your inner child yearning for your love. It is telling you, even when you feel like I'm wrong, it's just your inner child telling you, I've been told that everything I did was wrong. My existence was wrong. Please, somebody acknowledge my pain and trauma. So that's why it's so important to simply just be with the feeling. We don't want to change the feeling, because it's like if somebody was raped, they're going to feel tremendous pain and sorrow. You wouldn't want to say oh, let's now change your feelings of pain and sorrow. Let's think positive and happy thoughts. No, you're very valid to feel that way. You actually have to feel that feeling. Anybody would feel that feeling. Somebody punches you in the face, you're going to feel pain. So you don't want to say, okay, I don't feel the pain. If somebody punches in your face, that's invalidating. It is perfectly okay. It's perfectly valid. That's what I mean by valid. It's not accepting that it's true, but it's perfectly valid to feel that way. And it's your inner child just feels at peace. But after you be with the feeling, then you want to know that you give it the validation. Then you know that you want to tell yourself, you want to tell your inner child that there's nothing about you is wrong. You're born a good person. You're born perfect. You're born you have purpose. God created you for a reason. God made you into that. Your existence is beautiful. Unfortunately, your parents were trying to mold you and shape you and invalidating the beautiful existence of who you are, and denying that and validating that and trying to shape you to serve their ego, their unresolved pain and trauma, because they didn't want to deal with it themselves. They use you as a tool to kind of deal with it indirectly, not directly. So you want to tell yourself, when these feelings come up, you want to sever the cord, almost like an umbilical cord, but you want to bring up the feeling of guilt that you feel towards your friend. That's oh, I'm an extension of him, or these feelings of failure and I'm something wrong about my existence is wrong. When you feel these feelings, feel it, be with it, validate it. But the next thing you want to do is tell yourself, actually close your eyes. I want you to say this out loud. I'm not an extension of others.
I am not an extension of others.
I'm not an extension of my father.
I am not an extension of my father.
I'm not an extension of my mother.
I am not an extension of my mother.
I am my own entity.
I am my own entity.
I have my own existence.
I have my own existence.
And I want you to really feel that. Actually feel your own existence, because to honor your own existence was selfish. That was the programming that you got. And if you were to honor your own feelings, honor your own existence, you would be alone. You would be emotionally abandoned. The only way you can receive quality time with your parents, which is doing just what they wanted to do. It's how invalidating that must be. So you're going to feel the shame that, oh, something about me is wrong. And then that person you're prospecting, like, oh, what did I did was wrong. I am wrong, because they made your existence feel like it was shame and wrong. And so you want to feel the feeling, validate it, and then sever or to melt that feeling away, sever the cord through this mantra.
Okay. That's why as I was saying it out loud, I was like, oh, I need to write that down. I have a whole list of affirmations that I'm trying to restructure my mind to think in a certain way instead of the way that it has worked. So those are great ways. Thank you.
Yeah. And something else you can always add to the mix is to know that you're inherently infinite. Your worth is inherently infinite. So what does that mean? You cannot add to your worth through success, and you cannot take away from your worth through failure, because what is inherently infinite cannot be added to, cannot be taken away.
Mm-hmm. So would you say then, because that's kind of what the book, Anger, Understanding the Powerful Emotion of Anger, it says first is to recognize how you feel. Second is to question why you feel, who's involved with it. And then the next step is to find a resolution. And then the next step is to either execute the resolution, or if there is no resolution to be had, to just release it and let it go. Would you say that is kind of coinciding with what you're saying here about, bring the emotion in, accept it, acknowledge it, validate it, feel it. And then at that point, you have to figure out a solution to eradicate it?
But you don't need to exactly eradicate it, because it's perfectly valid for you to feel that way when you're treated. You're going to feel shame. You're going to feel like your existence is wrong when you're treated as an extension. You're not allowed to have your own existence. It's okay for you to feel. That's like natural. Somebody punches you in the face, mm-hmm. You're going to feel the pain. You cannot say like, okay, I don't feel pain. It's like, that's denial. So it's like you give like the feeling an emotional hug, and that's what your inner child really wants.
So you're not trying to, I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, I'm not trying to remove it. I'm just here to acknowledge it. And then through the acknowledgement of it,
to be with the feeling is
mm-hmm.
being with yourself. And then you acknowledge it by knowing the trauma that it's coming from. Mm. You validate it.
And what that will do will then in case actually not eradicate it, but make it more understood so it doesn't have as much of an influence.
The feeling is born out of the trauma of being treated as an extension of your parents. Mm-hmm. So instead of like, oh, okay, let me change the feeling, but it's perfectly normal and valid to feel that way. But that feeling is perpetuating itself in your interaction with that person that you were prospecting and your friends and your kids. So you want to, the root of it is viewing yourself as an extension of others, right? Because with your kids, like they need to do what's right, because that was the programming that you had to do. You need to do what's right, but what was right was to serve your parents' ego and pain. And again, with this person that you're prospecting, I did something wrong. I am wrong. But that means when you're an extension of somebody else, that's your only existence. That means your own existence is wrong. So how do you eradicate it? The core of the core is saying, I'm not an extension of others. And you tell that to yourself. You tell that to your inner child, because that's where the programming began. And in your relation to other people. And and use that mantra to help you sever yourself from these elements, the effects of that trauma, which is you're going to feel shame. You're going to feel like you're wrong. You're going to feel very responsible for others.
Yeah, 100%. It helps me understand so much more of myself too, because yesterday I just couldn't figure out why I felt the way that I felt over this situation with the lady of prospecting. I was like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, this is part of the game. There's going to be people that aren't going to want to talk to you, and that's just part of it. But I just kept, why does this bother me so much? I don't understand. Like, I already recognized that what she feels has nothing to do with me, and it has everything to do with herself, but somehow it's still
But
makes
she's
me feel
treating you
inadequate.
as an extension of herself, subconsciously. And then
Yes.
you're used to that because you're conditioned, you're programmed, you were forced
Mm.
to live that role. And so it's like subconscious, you can gravitate towards that and play that out, and it feels bad. But you just tell yourself, you be with the feeling, validate it. But and then you tell yourself, I'm not an extension of her, and I'm not an extension of my parents, because that's where it's rooted in.
So in those situations that I come to that kind of situation, I would just simply remind myself, I would accept the feeling, acknowledge where the feeling is coming from, and then say the mantra: I am not an extension of this person. I am not an extension of my parents. I am my own entity, and I am an inherently infinite, right?
Yeah, and I have my own existence.
And I have my own, okay. Yeah, that's like, it's so crazy how just what you tell yourself will dictate how you feel. And if you keep telling yourself the same story, you will continue to feel that same way, but you can restructure the story. I love it. I love the way psychology is. It's beautiful. Thank you.
You want to restructure it at the core,
Mm-hmm.
which is that viewing yourself as an extension of others. But the feelings that are born out of that experience and that trauma, you don't need to restructure that. That's perfectly valid to feel that way in the moment and to feel that feeling.
Mm-hmm. It's just yeah. But eventually over time, that feeling will not be as intense due to the restructuring of the thought process with the mantra, realizing they're not an extension of me. So then under that circumstance, then what she said to me wouldn't have bothered me. And I've just been like, okay, and move forward. But I didn't do that because, okay, yeah, it's all clicking for me.
Perfect. And this has been a great experience, but we're about coming to a close. What thoughts, questions, or feelings do you have?
I feel tons of gratitude. Like it brings a lot of emotion because I've struggled with this for a long time, and I don't want to struggle, and I want to understand myself. I don't want to not struggle because that's part of it, but I just want to understand why I do what I do and why I act the way that I act. And there are moments that I feel helpless and confused and questioning of myself, and why is this happening? And I don't know a resolution. And this whole experience brought so much understanding to me on why I do what I do. And so I just want you to know I'm very grateful for you. Thank you. You are a wonderful person, man, and you have a lot of wisdom.
That means a lot to me. Thank you for sharing that. Really, thank you.
You're welcome. This was a beautiful session, man. I really appreciate you.